And so that's what ends up happening. You know, if you have this really poor working memory, you go through life thinking, I'm not as smart, so I have to work harder. Either that or you give up. And so my entire life, until I was diagnosed with ADHD, I really thought, well, I'm just not as smart. And so you're doing a lot of masking, right? To this day, I can't remember one chorus of my favorite song. I have no working memory. And so, you know, this book, it was terrifying because it took me 2 years to write. I wrote and I studied for 2 years. And sometimes I think, oh, someone's going to ask me a question. And sometimes people do about the book. And I'm like, I don't know. Did I talk about that in the book? Did I write about that in the book? It's just gone.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Today, I have a friend and colleague in the field, Tracy Otsuka, JD turned ADHD certified coach and host of ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. You have likely heard of her, as her podcast is one of the top ranking ADHD podcasts in the world. Over the past decade, Tracy's empowered thousands of clients, from doctors and therapists to C-suite executives and entrepreneurs, to see their neurodivergence as a strength, not a weakness. Tracy leverages her analytical skills from being a lead counsel at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to identify the right questions to ask her clients so they can boost their productivity, improve their finances, save failing relationships, and live happier lives. Tracy's expertise and experience as an adult living with ADHD are regularly sought out by top-tier media, including Inc., Forbes, Attitude Magazine, and the Gold Digger podcast with Jenna Kutcher. When she's not sharing her thought leadership around ADHD on other platforms, she hosts her own podcast, which ranks #1 in its category and has over 6 million downloads across 160 countries. So if you are not following Tracy's podcast, go do it now and then come back to the episode, or listen to our episode and then do it. But just put it on your to-do list or to-do list, whatever you use. She also moderates a Facebook group with nearly 100,000 members. She's married and a mother of 2. She lives in Sonoma County outside of San Francisco. Her new book, ADHD for Smartass Women, just came out in 2024 and was number 60 on Amazon out of all books, and is Amazon recommended. So if you are learning about how to use ADHD towards your strengths, if you are learning about ADHD, I had the pleasure of reading Tracy's book, and it goes into all different areas of ADHD and the complexity of it and how to use your strengths. And Dr. Hallowell did the foreword. Dr. Hallowell also calls Tracy the godmother of ADHD. So Tracy, warm welcome to Successful with ADHD.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so great rekindling. Tracy and I had the best time when I was recording on her podcast. So I am so glad you made it on, and we didn't have any technical glitches yet. So let's get into it. Tracy, I know that you've been around for a while now, and you were JD or RJD turned ADHD certified coach. I know that Marcus, your child, had ADHD, then you learned you had ADHD. So can you fill in the gaps for me? What was that journey like for you?
My son, Marcus, he was 12 at the time. And since the age of 9, we knew there was something going on, but we didn't know what. So we had paid for thousands of dollars of visual processing therapy. We had paid for occupational therapy. He had met with a psychiatrist, psychologist. We just couldn't figure out what it was. But all of a sudden, so he was just swimming along, top of his class, if you can be top of your class at 9 years old, but he was. Wow. And then all of a sudden in 4th grade, he just developed this anxiety around going to school. I mean, he went to a Catholic school, and they had to wear this like little red sweater, and he would literally chew the sweater to shreds.
Oh my goodness, the anxiety.
Yes, he was really social, loved his friends, but getting him into the car in the morning, we would literally drive out and he would be hanging onto the door trying to break out. of the car. And so that's when we decided there's something going on. He has so much anxiety around school. What is it? And so 3 years, we went to all these people. When I think it was 9 years old too, he came to us and he said, you know, there's this other school, and I think he was at a Catholic school. I think it would be better for my brain. It was a country day school. So it was more creative. And he said, there's an application process. His sister was applying to high school at the time. And so this would have been for 5th grade. He was applying. And there was a leadership scholarship. And he said, I'm going to apply for it. And so he took a pencil and he applied by himself. It was a Sunday morning. And we came out for breakfast. Wow. And there he was.
In 5th grade.
In 5th grade. He was so ambitious. He was always Googling stuff and trying to figure out, like, how do you get into Harvard? You know, things that most kids don't do, right? They're just fooling around and having fun.
Sure.
But he was really, really ambitious and he had big sights for himself. And I think what it was is that he was so worried because something changed in his brain. And all of a sudden, what was really easy for him was no longer easy. And the hardest subject was math. So in this Catholic school, up until 4th grade, they would do 10 problems a night. We would later find out that Marcus is gifted in math. But then once they got to 4th grade, it was 30 problems a night. And after 10 problems, he would just check out. And so we would have these nightly battles. And finally, I was just like, this doesn't make sense. I don't want to have these arguments with my son. And so then we brought in a tutor. You know, I mean, we were, privileged, right? We were able to afford to do all these things, to try all these things.
Try to fill in the gaps.
Yeah. So he decides he's going to apply to the school. We're like, okay, he's not going to get the leadership scholarship. Well, lo and behold, he got it. You know, he went to the little interviews and he got the leadership scholarship. So he was there for 2 years. The first year, he loved it. The second year, 6th grade, we started to hear from the teachers again. You know, we don't understand what's going on. We don't understand how a child as bright as Marcus could be so unmotivated. You know, he just doesn't care. And so he decided he wanted to go back to the Catholic school. There was a lot of structure in the Catholic school. And what he complained about is, look, this is ridiculous. Like, kids can just come into school however they want. They're literally sliding in on their bellies, on the desks. And he was like, there's so much chaos. I don't think that's the best way to learn. And I think there was so much to learn and not enough structure. And so he went back to the Catholic school. But that was the summer it would have been the summer going into 7th grade. We decided we're going to get him tested. There was actually a friend of mine who, she didn't test kids, but she worked in a school and helped the kids that had various neurodivergencies or were neurodivergent. I know there's a proper way to say it, and I can never remember. One way is supposedly a no-no. Oh, well, I can't remember it. So
you're doing your best here, Trace. Your best.
I know. And so she sat us down and she said, I think he might have nonverbal learning disorder. I had never heard of nonverbal learning disorder. But the thing about Marcus is his gift is the social part of life. He's just everybody loved him, and he was really good at maintaining relationships. Whatever school he went to, he would take the relationships with him. So we got him tested. You know, he went through, I think it was a battery of 2 days worth of tests. And when they came back to give us the result, they sat us down and said he has ADHD. And I almost fell off my chair. I thought ADHD meant you're not very smart. You're all over the place. You're never going to be successful. And I knew how ambitious this kid was. And so the two things didn't square. So we ended up hiring a psychologist to explain ADHD to us and to meet with Marcus and to kind of help us, navigate it. She had a meeting with him. She had a meeting with our entire family. And she had a meeting with my husband and myself. And she sat us down. Thankfully, Marcus wasn't there. And she said, okay, your first job as his parent is to reduce his expectations so we won't be disappointed in life. And I just remember thinking, I don't care if my child was intellectually disabled. What? I would never say that to any child, right? I mean, if you aim here, okay, maybe you'll come here. But if you aim here, you're, down here, you're never going to. I just could not believe that she said that. So lo and behold, we never went back. And I started to research ADHD on my own. Good
for you.
What does it mean? How could Marcus possibly be diagnosed? Because this doesn't make any sense. And I knew there were things that when he was interested in, oh my gosh, he became the best that you could be. And I also knew that at the Catholic school, the principal, the teachers, everybody loved him because he wasn't a disruptive kid. I mean, he's funny and a little inappropriate at times, so he could get himself into trouble, but he wasn't disrespectful. And my understanding of ADHD is, you know, you're the crazy kid who could care less what the teacher says. And he wasn't at all like that. So as I was researching ADHD, literally 8 months later, and it was a second reading of Ned Hallowell's book, Driven to Distraction. I still remember I was on the Stairmaster at the gym. Drivenness is a form of hyperactivity. And I was like, oh my gosh, he got his ADHD from me. And I started to look at my family of origin, all the things that I was learning about ADHD. And I was like, it's all over my family, you know? But I just thought, oh, we're just a little different,
Sure.
you know? And my brother is he's never been diagnosed, but he's totally ADHD. But he was the classic ADHD, you know, rolling cars. He crashed motorcycles. He was always in trouble. And so he was very, you know, classic. My sister, much more inattentive. My brother, probably inattentive. Okay. My father, again, you know, they haven't been diagnosed, so I'm just kind of outing them here, but they would agree. My father, probably more inattentive as well. And my mother is more like me. So it was just all over my family, you know, and my grandfather was actually adopted, and I'm half Japanese, half German. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's just so much less ADHD in Japan. And in Japan, they don't give their kids up for adoption, you know?
Diagnosed.
Yes, diagnosed. But I still think from the research that I've looked at, there is just a smaller percentage of ADHD in Japan. Now, if you have ADHD, though, it is a big problem. I can imagine if you have ADHD in Japan, it's probably pretty bad, right? Because there's nobody to help you. Everybody seems to be very linear in their thoughts and just their ability to follow rules.
Right. The flexibility is just not the same.
Yeah. So I just started, I started doing all the research, and, I'm like, oh my gosh, it explained everything in my life. I have always been a good student. I'm a lot like my son in terms of I would work really. I was super, super ambitious. No, I am different than my son. I was super, super ambitious, but I would, like girls typically do, all the masking, everything I could possibly do to get the good grades, right? Where my son was like, screw that, school's a social construct. Why do I have to do this? Probably smarter than I am in terms of like questioning all of it. I didn't.
Sure.
But when I think about law school and I think about how hard I had to work compared to my peers, I went to graduate law school as well and did this program at Georgetown. It was securities regulation. So, stocks, bonds, finance, no aptitude at all. Makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway.
It totally makes sense in my brain.
Yeah, totally. Right. It's a challenge.
Right. Don't tell me what I can't do because I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do it.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
She was a partner in a law firm. She would never study. I would do all of the studying for weeks. I would put together these incredible outlines together. Then I would take what I learned, put it into a notebook with all of the color coding and tabs and everything. And then from there, I would bring it down to a few smaller sheets of paper, like maybe three pages. And then from there, I would put it all into 3x5 cards. And that is how I had to study. And I had a roommate who lived with me. She was older, very linear, very like classically bright. And she would literally pick my notes up, just my note cards. She would pick my note cards up, maybe read my, my truncated outline one time the night before. And without fail, if I got a B+, she would get an A-. If I got an A-, she would get an A or an A+. Like I could never do better than she did. And it was so frustrating. So, what I thought? I just thought, okay, she's just smarter than I am. I'm just not as smart. And so that's what ends up happening. If you have this really poor working memory, you go through life thinking, I'm not as smart, so I have to work harder. Either that or you give up. And so my entire life, until I was diagnosed with ADHD, I really thought, well, I'm just not as smart. And so you're doing a lot of masking, right? To this day, I can't remember one chorus of my favorite song. I have no working memory. And so, this book, it was terrifying because it took me 2 years to write. I wrote and I studied for 2 years. And sometimes I think, oh, someone's going to ask me a question. And sometimes people do about the book. And I'm like, I don't know. Did I talk about that in the book? Did I write about that in the book? It's just gone.
So now we've pivoted to Tracy's book.
I call them word holes.
I hear you.
So do you struggle with that too, Brooke?
100%.
Working memory, really?
Oh, yeah. My husband the other day, and I'm sorry to interject here, but he does one of our accountability groups. And he said, the people in the group were talking about page 77 of your book. I'm like, what the heck is in page 77 of my book? Like, what are you talking about? I do it all the time. And like, it's not that I don't know or the information won't come out afterwards. It's just like, if you ask me on spot, like I'm not going to likely remember that I studied that or I wrote that or that happened. That's correct.
Well, and Brooke, that is why for the longest time, I think people that are in the ADHD space probably thought, and I get this a lot, that, oh, well, she doesn't come on podcasts because, she doesn't want to make the time. She's too good for it, whatever people think in their brain, right? It's like, no, I love people. I love coming on podcasts, but I was so afraid that my working memory would fail me. And if I didn't have all the structure and the systems, right? Because this is impromptu. Now, what I discovered in writing the book and marketing the book is it's actually my favorite thing to do. But it was all of the masking and these thoughts in my brain that I wasn't going to be able to do it that were the problem, right? Because you know how when someone tells you, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. And so you are preparing it, right? And I have a runway because I know what to expect. But if you come in and you throw me something from left field, no, I am planning to go down this runway. I can't now divert and go, it's because I'm thinking about what I already was like. It's so hard.
With ADHD, that's why I think agendas are so important before meetings, right? Yes. Because it gives you that structure and that time where you can feel in control and prepared and not off out of left field when someone asks you a question. Yeah.
And then you're not spending 5 hours processing it.
Yes. So, yes. Right. So with the slow processing speed, right? You then might not know the answer right away and you feel frozen, but then like 5 minutes later, you're like, wait a second, I know you've moved on and I don't know what you're talking about now, but I'm still on that question that you asked me 5 minutes ago and I finally have the answer. Can we go back for a second?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you can't even follow the interviewer because you're still thinking about, okay, wait, where can I grasp? And sometimes all it takes me is one word. And I find that word, and then it's a ladder, and it's like, it opens the door, and there's all the information. Does the same thing happen to you?
Yes. 100%. 100%. Like if I'm doing talks, like public speaking, or just even, whatever, it's the same thing. It's like, I'm not going to remember everything that I prepared ahead of time, but key words connected to feelings, connected to pictures, because I'm a very visual person. That's what's going to unlock the thing for me, and a lot of practice too.
Yeah. Have you noticed that sometimes someone will ask you something and you've got to unlock the memory, and the only way to unlock the memory is you have to get into your body and feel. Like I can literally identify a feeling of what I was feeling when I received that information. And sometimes I have to think about, okay, well, what were you wearing? Like weird stuff like that. And if I can
what were the smells? Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But there's like proven science with that too. I mean, what you're wearing, what you're smelling. I even remember, and I'm not a weed smoker. I always got anxiety with that. But I remember people saying like back in the day, like if you studied and you smoked pot, then you need to take the test smoking too, because your brain was receiving the information in a certain way. So I don't know how accurate that is, but that just came to me right now. I know. So talk to me. You wrote your book because we jumped a little bit, and that's totally fine because that's what we do. You wrote this book. It took you 2 years to write it, and you are on this path of like unlocking pieces that made sense to you. But also you had a really difficult time, I know, on a personal level while you were writing this book. You had a parent that was close to you who passed away, and sorry for your loss.
You know, I was just thinking about that in the shower this morning, actually. So not only that, but my husband in March, my husband was in the hospital and they told us he had a heart attack. And my husband is 6 feet tall and 180 pounds. I mean, he's, you know, and he's a neurotic about his health, and he always has been. And I'm like, I don't think this is a heart attack. There is a congenital heart issue, but he seems to be okay. So that happened in March. And then we got back from Prague and I was finishing up all the book stuff. And the book was due in June. And so I had to put off so many things and a lot of things with my parents. And I was putting everything off thinking, oh, well, once the book's done, right? Well, my nephew got COVID. And my nephew was living with my parents.
Oh, gosh.
And he brought COVID into the house. My dad got COVID, and then my mom got COVID. So my nephew and my dad were fine. My mom seemed fine. My mom had high blood pressure, though. And what they don't tell you is if you have high blood pressure, there is up to a 25 times higher risk of a massive stroke. And so she seemed to be fine. On a Wednesday, I remember she sent me a message and said, you know, no, I'm totally, that was Tuesday, totally fine. We're all, you know, on the mend, no worries at all. And then that following Wednesday afternoon, she's like, I just really have a headache. I can't not, you know, get rid of this headache. It was now Thursday morning. You know, I had a dentist appointment. I had all kinds of work stuff. And, you know, the book though, I sent it out on Tuesday. So it was now Thursday. I'm thinking, okay, now I can get back into, you know, all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. And I get a call from my dad and he said, your mom had a massive stroke. And I don't know how long she was in the house because he had been out in the back gardening. And the long and short of it is, unfortunately, she never came out of it.
I'm so sorry.
And my mom, she was just like, there were no health issues. This wasn't like she had been really ill. Sure. None of that. It was literally all of a sudden one day, you know, she's gone. And I guess what I realized when I wrote the book is I really wrote the book for her because I've always seen so much of myself in her. I remember when Ned Hallowell wrote the foreword, I was going to send it to her. But my perfectionist side, my parents were really, my dad's a dentist and they're really all about science and data. And, you know, at some point we were having dinner at our house a couple months before. And I remember my parents said to me, well, what do you want to do with all this? And I said, well, you know, honestly, I would love to go into the medical schools and talk about, you know, how we're missing all this, you know, these women and educate them on what ADHD looks like in women. And both my parents at the same time went, you know, like, what? You're not a doctor. You're not a scientist. You're not, you know, and I will say my parents have always been really supportive. So that kind of was like shocking to me. And so that is what played into my thoughts about, okay, I'm not going to send my mom the forward. I want the book all done. I want it perfect. I want the hardback. And then I'm going to give it to her because, you know, perfectionism and that's more credibility and blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, I never gave it to her. She never read it. She didn't know that I wrote it for her. But what I will tell you is I was really surprised at how I handled everything. And I did recently on my podcast an episode on grief. And then I did an episode on grief with 3 other women who also have ADHD, who at the same time last year, like they went through the same thing. And we talked about how there's something about the ADHD brain. Oh my gosh, I was on fire. I could not believe, I never thought, I am so squeamish. I hate hospitals. I hate it all. I never thought I would be able to do what I did, but I just kind of took over. I did a lot of tapping, and I really I believed in tapping before.
Like EFT?
Yeah. EFT. I believed in it before because it had completely helped me. And I'd seen, like, especially with the ADHD brain, we need ways to regulate our nervous system where we can move. Meditation is often hard for us, like straight meditation. Like, there's other meditations. You can walk and meditate. You can wash the dishes and meditate, but most people think of meditation as, om or whatever. Yeah. And we really struggle to do that. Right. What I love about tapping is you're moving the whole time. You're tapping on, these parts of your body, these 9 pressure points, acupressure points. And so I believed in tapping before, but I can't even rave enough about it, because what tapping did for me during that time was it allowed me to disconnect from the emotion. And so I could be in it. And I did. And of course I was so sad. I couldn't believe it. It was like, I thought I'd have 10 more years with my mom. Right. And my mom and I,
and that she was going to read your book.
Yeah. And, we were going to do all these things together. I'd take her on, book tour things. So I was really, really upset, but I was able to handle it emotionally. I was so strong. And part of it was I didn't really have a choice, right? My mom passed away. I had to go back to New York, getting my daughter set up for law school. So I was there for 6 weeks. And then the minute I came back, it was all of the promo stuff for the book.
Sure. So you were just on a roller coaster.
Yeah. And so it wasn't really until, I'd say, March, when everything started to become more kind of back to normal, that I kind of had to deal with the things with my mom. And I had my mom throughout my kids' whole childhood. My mom was here. And that's what I have to keep thinking about. It was awful, but I was very lucky.
Right. And I love that you have that mindset, that you can think about the good times. And with EFT too, it's showing a lot of gratitude, right?
Oh my gosh. I've tried a lot of things, but EFT, and I didn't do it. I probably did it 15 minutes a day. I would wake up in the morning and I would feel like I was going to throw up, right? And I'd know that I'd have to get in the car and go 2 hours down to where my mom was. And so that's when I started to do EFT, because this went on for 2 weeks. And I could literally physically feel myself disconnecting from the emotion. It was awful, but I could handle it, and I was going to handle it. I'm telling you, EFT, I'm just a huge believer now, because I saw what it could do in that instance, especially having never had to deal with that kind of grief.
Sure. So you're almost 1 year, or, I mean, it hasn't been 1 year yet, right?
No, it'll be a year on July 1st. Okay.
So I know we all experience grief differently, and I have not lost a parent yet. Do you feel like, besides the EFT, which I know has been so helpful for so many people with neurotypical and ADHD alike, do you feel by burying yourself in your book and having that motivation to just like prove that you can do this, right? To at least your dad or to your mom, in spirit, helped you also focus on one thing rather than experiencing the grief as much?
So I don't know how you feel about this, Brooke, but when people say to me, I'm so proud of you, but my first thought is always, you're so proud of me.
What are you
Who
proud
are
of?
you to be proud of me? Like, I never said that to my kids. I don't say that to the students that I work with. I don't say that to my women. I don't say that to anybody. You need to be proud of you, right? Who cares if other people are proud of you? But when it comes to my parents, I still had that. And so Anita Robertson, it was still different with my parents. And one of the things Anita said when she was on my podcast, the last one about grief, she said, you feel untethered. Because the thing about your parents is you're always kind of tethered to them while they're here, right? And I love my dad, but my mom and I were really, again, because we are so similar. My dad and I are actually quite different. But we're also similar. He's a very sarcastic sense of humor. What I realized is it doesn't matter if my parents are proud of me, right? It matters if I'm proud of me. And so the things that I choose to do have to be things that I care about, that I want to do, not things that, oh, well, I'm going to do this thing because then they're going to be proud of me, right? I know my parents, what they know about me is when I say I'm going to do something, I damn well do it. So I am totally that poster child for drivenness is a form of hyperactivity. And I am constantly trying to keep myself in the task positive network, which is where action happens, because I know I feel so much better when I'm in the TPN. And when I get into the DMN, the default mode network, and I do, it's probably why I hate going to bed, that nighttime, because there you are with your thoughts. And so that's when I kind of think about the things, and I think about my mom, and there isn't a day, honestly, there's probably not an hour that goes by where there's something that I see and it reminds me of my mom. I mean, even to the point of, I have my mom's smile, but I didn't realize it until she was gone. And when she was in the hospital, every time I smiled, all of a sudden I would see, oh my God, that's my mom.
Wow.
And it really made me happy then, that, okay, this is my mom. This is part of my mom. But now I think I'm going through this phase that when I have pictures of her all over the place, and I'm not happy anymore when I see them. It kind of depresses me. It makes me sad. So I know I'm kind of in the next stage, whatever it is, all those stages of grief, which I could never remember even if I tried. And I'm hoping to get back to the point where I will see things and it'll make me happy.
Sure. We were talking about also the fact that, like, with our ADHD brain, even though you might be an introvert, which I don't think you are.
More so as I've aged, though.
We need stimulus, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. For me too. I become more introverted, but we need stimulus, right? And by you go downsizing and going to a city, we seek that stimulus, even if it's for 5 minutes, right? We're around people. So Tracy, thank you for also just like going there with your mom, because I know it's not easy and you're still grieving and you're in a stage today. You might be in another stage tomorrow, but I think it speaks heavily to what you can do with ADHD, even going through such a difficult time, right? Like I believe, I know you didn't say it, but I also believe that there was a part of you that was like, I'm going to prove her wrong, even though she passed, right? I'm going to show up and do this. I'm going to get out there and talk to doctors and talk to people about strengths in women with ADHD or what they've gone through life, right? Just that drive and that fire from that unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah. And I mean, the truth of the matter is we get our information in different ways. And so what we've seen, where our experience is lived. And in the day to day, after you meet thousands of ADHD women, guess what we do really well? We see patterns. And so, and we see more women, right? Or people than your typical doctor will see because of, these big groups and podcasts. And,
Absolutely.
I've seen thousands of women. So I think that, yes, the medical information is really important, but so is the lived experience. And the problem with women is nobody's been listening to us.
Correct. Yeah. It's anxiety, depression, take this pill, let's do some talk therapy, right? But
every personality disorder.
Right? Exactly. I can't even tell you how many people told me it's just anxiety until I figured it out myself. But Tracy, tell me how you came up with the name ADHD for Smartass Woman.
Well, okay. So
Pretty bold, and I kind of love it.
I always joke about the fact that I'm always the outsider, right? I go into these industries with no experience, and somehow I'm able to pull it if I'm interested in it. I'm able to pull things together so much quicker than other people. What is always in common though is humor. And what I have realized over the years is that if I am struggling, like with a group of people, it is almost always because they are humorless. So I've discovered that if you don't have a sense of humor, I just don't even want to work with you. Now, there are some people who don't have a sense of humor, but they're just so kind and lovely, and all their heart and everything is on their sleeve, and everything is so serious, and that's part of the problem, right? But those kinds of people, yeah, I give them a pass. I love them. But, it's the snarky kind of linear type people who can never laugh at themselves. They can't laugh at other people. They can't laugh at anything. And so with the name, I looked at everything I had been able to accomplish. I looked at everything that other ADHD women that I had met had been able to accomplish. And I wanted to make sure that they saw how smart they were. Maybe not traditionally successful, maybe not traditionally smart, but frankly, in my mind, smarter, right? They were the ones that are able to use their creativity to, put all these novel concepts together and come up with these unusual, ideas or widgets or businesses or whatever. And it was just over and over and over again, I would meet these women. So with the name, I wanted to make sure that they knew they were smart. So ADHD for smart women. But we're also smartasses. We tend to be irreverent. We tend to say what other people only think, which is why we get into trouble. And I just love that kind of brain.
We're not rule followers.
No. And we're asking why and how come. And I'm sorry. I think those are the smartest people in our society. I do not. It's the rule followers who get the straight A's in school and never ask why. It's our curiosity. To me, that is what indicates intelligence, not can you follow rules and regurgitate crap.
I love that. Those are the leaders in our society, right? Like it's the why that drives the what. It's not the what that drives the why. So
exactly.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. Okay. So with that being said, do you think ADHD is a superpower?
I never say that ADHD is a superpower because between you, me, and your listeners, if I could have all of my talents, all of my skills, and also have an incredible working memory, oh my God, I would conquer the world, right? It's the working memory for me that has been my biggest problem with ADHD. And but it's not all people with ADHD. So my son, he was finally diagnosed with dyslexia. He was diagnosed with ADHD at 12, always knew there was something else. Diagnosed with dyslexia at 19. And he's gifted in math, but where he really struggles is when you take numbers and letters and put them together. And so it never made any sense, right? So my son has the most incredible working memory. So he's the kind of person that can debate anyone and he remembers all the facts and figures. I'm the one who I know how I feel. I am capable of putting together, a coherent argument in terms of I've done all the research, I've done all the reading. How I feel makes perfect sense, but hell if I can remember what the hell I learned when I'm arguing, especially because when I'm arguing, I'm anxious, right? And I'm upset. And so I can't remember any of it. So I do not believe that ADHD is a superpower. But what I do believe is there are traits of ADHD that make you positively frickin' brilliant, smarter than, the social constructs, the school system and how all that's been set up if you learn how to use your brain properly. So that would be my answer. And I think somewhere in the book, it might kind of give you that indication.
Do you think that living with ADHD is typically a deficit?
No.
Or it's just not black and white?
No, I don't at all. Okay, so this is what I have seen. I'm going to say women because that's who I work with. The women that struggle the most with ADHD have developmental trauma, big T trauma. I do believe that having ADHD can also cause trauma, right? Especially if you've got parents that are nagging you all the time, you've got teachers and coaches and, your partner, and that's trauma. And all those little cuts to me can end up being a big T trauma. Mm-hmm. The women that I have met who by and large had, we're lucky, right? We get the biggest privilege there is to have two parents that love you. And there's also something about, if you're a combined type, if there's some hyperactivity in there, because I think the hyperactivity is what's responsible for the drivenness. And we learn early on that, the way to feel better is to constantly be doing. Now, you can burn yourself out doing too much. But if you have my kind of personality that, I don't need a lot of sleep. I kind of wake up, on the good side. Like it's gotten harder as I've gotten older because, our cortisol levels are highest in the morning. So my workaround is I literally get out of bed and I walk right to, our little room that has our gym equipment in it. And I work out and that spikes my dopamine and then I'm totally fine.
Last thing I wanted to ask you. Talked about staying in TPN until, of course, all of our thoughts flood at night. And then, but how do you keep yourself in TPN? So you just mentioned, okay, in the morning, your cortisol levels are high and you work out. What are some other things? You do EFT. What else?
I'm always looking for things that excite me. I'm always looking for whether it is, I can plan a trip or I have to work today, but I'm going to go down to the library in this town that I really love. And then, afterwards, I'm going to go for dinner. It can be little things, I'm going to go walk the dog. So you know what it is for me? It's that I never feel like I have enough time. I have no sense of time whatsoever, like literally none. And so I'm always feeling like I have more to do than I have time to do it. I have no ability even now to gauge how long will it take me to get these things done. So what ends up happening is I've got my head down and I'm doing. And what I notice is I never do it to burnout. I've never burned out.
You've never burned out, Tracy?
I've never burned out. No. But I think it's because I don't let myself burn out. I have no guilt.
What is burnout to you? I wonder how you would even get there for you personally.
Well, I think I would burn out if I had no sleep. And I do struggle with sleep, especially with this book. But I don't struggle with falling asleep. I don't struggle with staying asleep. What I struggle with is getting into bed because, again, I feel like, oh my gosh, there's just so many things to do in life and I want to experience them all. And so I will do stupid things like I'll start Googling stuff, and then all of a sudden I'm down a rabbit hole and I look up and it's, oh my God, it's 2 a.m. But especially with my book, because there was so much work and because I do have staff that is not on my time zone, I would stay up until like 2:30 in the morning. And, I've done trainings on revenge bedtime procrastination and how important sleep is my entire life. It is the only argument my husband and I have ever had. He wants to go to bed early. I'm like, no, I don't want to go to bed, And I finally realized when I looked at the science of sleep, how important it was that the amount of REM sleep you get is directly proportional to your lifespan. And when I read that, I was like, okay, I need to do something about sleep. So, I've got a Whoop, I've got an Oura Ring, I've got an Apple, a watch, a smartwatch. I've got all the crap to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow. But it wasn't until probably 3 weeks ago that I made the concerted effort that this needs to stop. You don't need to be up this late for the book anymore. You need to get back, you need to get into bed.
It's all about feeling good, because if you're not feeling good, then you can't be productive. You cannot do your to-do or to-do list. There's nothing that you can really accomplish effectively if you're not getting and taking care of your basic hierarchy of needs. So Anyway, I know you and I can talk for hours. Tell us where people can go and find you if they want to work with you or want to get your book.
Probably the easiest place they should go is my website, which is ADHDforsmartwomen.com. And the only reason ass isn't in there is because Google would ding us. Same thing with the book. Like we've had so many problems with the word ass. It's laughable, but whatever. That's what happens when you challenge the status quo.
Not everyone works in the way that our ADHD brain does, right? Unfortunately, some logistics are linear, but you still continue to challenge it. And I love that about you. And I love that you attract those types of people who can laugh about, their obstacles, but also work through it in a growth mindset, a positive way. Exactly. And use their strengths, use their motivations to do things to excel in life. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And I know you've been doing this for a while, so appreciate you in the ADHD space. Awesome to have amazing women supporting other amazing women.
True. Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.